July of 1995. Ted Greene showed me this. I sat 6 feet in front of him and heard his guitar tone for the first time. It was like a warm blanket that wrapped around you. He'd brought the 53 Telecaster that day. I was 13 years old. Ted was a legend of the guitar, there's no question about it, although he lived his entire life in virtual obscurity to the rest of the world. Ted only made one album, called Solo Guitar, and famously wrote the book Chord Chemistry. Every great guitar player in Los Angeles looked up to Ted, and from what I'm aware of, he charged between $20 and $30, according to different stories I've heard, for lessons in his apartment. And I sincerely wish that I would have had a chance to have studied with Ted, but I was only visiting Los Angeles for a 5-day guitar workshop. Ted was the special guest. I hadn't even been to Nashville yet, didn't even know anything about Chet Atkins. Ted Greene stepped into my life as a lifelong inspiration, very early on in mine, and I was only around him for 2 hours, one afternoon, in a room on the campus at UCLA. After making a joke about a hypothetical situation he'd envisioned in which a man was maimed by a 13-gauge E-string, sharing with us the string gauges that he had on his 53 Telecaster, this man immediately endeared himself to me. I was taking twice-weekly formal guitar lessons and had been doing so for about 5 years by that point in time. Steve Kahn in that workshop, the great New York City session guy who played on Gaucho by Steely Dan, said he believed that I was doing things right, and if he could have gone back and done it all over again, he would have found a teacher that made him learn how to read and unpack the fingerboard in the way that I was being taught to quite early on. But in the midst of all that, what I was really interested in was the blues, and to some extent, the blues-based end of classic rock. Ted was the first genius I encountered, along with Joe DiOrio, who didn't make me feel inferior, and in fact I found encouragement from. Joe DiOrio told me I'd have to practice. Joe DiOrio ragged on a lot of jazz guitar players for getting a crappy tone and esteemed the beautiful sound that a lot of great rock guitar players got, and I listened to every single word each of those men said. And Ted said he thought it'd be just about impossible to not find the early Rolling Stones and Jimmy Reed music pretty much irresistible. From that moment forward, Ted Greene became my kindred spirit, though I grew up to play virtually nothing like him whatsoever. If you're intrigued by the Paul David's question mark in the title, we're going to give that some context a little bit later on in the video. The context of what Ted meant to me on my musical journey needs to be fully understood. So 2 things. 1, if you hate-clicked on this to troll me, please suspend your judgment. And then if you still want to troll me at the end, go right ahead. 2, I've got no criticism of Paul David's. Success in any field is highly admirable. We have a really positive community forming here, and it's going to stay positive. Well, I said the other day that Tommy Emmanuel taught me about the value of economy and motion was the first time I really realized that. And that's absolutely true. What I learned from Ted Greene is the opposite side of that coin. Sometimes, for a certain sound, it's okay to break the rules, and it's even okay to be inefficient. For example, you could use a standard straight pick that's completely efficient, gives you good motion and fluidity, and you would get a certain sound from doing so. Yes, I like Eric Clapton's rhythm guitar playing just about as much as his lead guitar playing. Ted bought Barbara Franklin, the love of his life, the Beano album. It's in his journals. A lot of great, iconic rock guitar players. It's not power chords. There's a little bit of major third in there. Listen to Eddie Van Halen's rhythm playing. Listen to Eric on Sunshine of Your Love. The major third gives it that extra little thing. Ted said that for a real gut bucket blues sound, you can drop the pick completely. No, don't play with just your bare fingertips. Pick up a coin. Try different ones, a penny. I find that I like a dime. It gives a good scrape to the note. Sounds good with spring reverb on it too. Here's a penny. There's no fluidity in the right hand anymore whatsoever. There's no efficiency to the picking technique. You can't pull off the Stevie Ray Vaughan licks. You can't do the Clapton thing where he's overplaying in Cream, but it's beautiful. All you can do is dig in and try to keep it sounding where it's more primal than than technically correct. And there's a little bit of a self-challenge to it to keep it sounding kind of gut bucket without overstepping the boundary and winding up with a really ice pick, irritating sound. Especially on the high E string, that can be a challenge. You don't want to generate that. Whereas with a straight pick, edge picking is perfectly reasonable and is a good sound and tends to take off some of the harsh top-end quality of the pointed end of the pick. I find that the best sound is straight on the string. This is not efficient, it's not good technique, but it's a cool sound. The reason that Ted Greene was on my mind again here recently was specifically because of Paul Davids. So if anything, it ought to be a compliment. If anybody ever said that I sounded anything at all like Ted Greene, I would be elated and feel like, wow, I did something right. Recently, Paul put out a video to his audience of him playing Autumn Leaves. I don't watch guitar YouTube, I watch Uncle Doug and electronics tutorials, legitimately. But for some reason that came up in my suggestions, and when I saw the thumbnail, immediately something looked a little strange. He was playing a blonde Telecaster with a maple neck, with a standard Telecaster neck pickup, and it made me wonder if he might have said a word or two about Ted. So I clicked on the video. I proceeded to watch the next 18 minutes of that video. As he played the tune, although he was playing with a straight pick instead of fingers, which Ted would have been using his bare fingers, and there's footage of Ted, I believe, at GIT, playing the tune, fully fingerstyle. The tone he was getting, and the feeling of it, reminded me enough of Ted that I started to really hope he's gotta mention Ted Greene in this video at some point. And I scrolled down in the comments and saw one comment that mentioned Ted Greene, but I saw a lot more that mentioned Julian Lage, suggesting that maybe he based his arrangement on Julian Lage. Then I went and watched Julian Lage play Autumn Leaves. Relative to the performance that Ted gave, what Paul Davids was playing sounded a lot closer to Ted Greene, and he didn't mention Julian Lage anywhere in the video either. As I got to the end of the video, by the time that I realized, okay, he's not going to mention anything about Ted Greene, it left me A, thinking again about Ted, B, thinking about how ignored this genius of the guitar was for the vast bulk of his life, the time when he was playing at the Seashell restaurant and people were talking over him and waitresses were pouring ice water into glasses. I get it, we've all played those gigs. I've played those gigs myself. You go into those gigs knowing that you're going to be wallpaper. Life doesn't owe any of us anything. So I don't want this to be mistaken, but it reminded me of every lesson I ever received from every player I ever admired. Is to be gracious on the way up, gracious on the way down, and when there's a guitar player whose shoulders you're standing on, because face it, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, it's a gracious thing to acknowledge them. Stevie Ray Vaughan would never shut up about Albert King. Tommy Emmanuel travels the world, giving credit and respect to Chet Atkins. Michael Bloomfield told his audience about B.B. King, and B.B. says in his memoir that he felt like Michael and several of Michael's contemporaries were his press agents and showed him nothing but love and kindness. As I got to the end of the video, it left me feeling one more time like I'd just seen the footage all over again of the waitress pouring ice water. There are people keeping Ted's legacy and memory alive. The Ted Greene Archives in particular comes to mind. You can go there and listen to full lessons that his students have donated and uploaded and that have been shared for you to listen to and continue learning from the special human being and brilliant guitar player that was Ted Greene. So getting back to him, one critical disclaimer. When you're doing this, be sure to pack extra strings. If you're ever at an increased risk for breaking strings, this is that time. So I wouldn't recommend overtaxing your guitar strings if you're stuck without a backup. Of course, part of turning pro is always being prepared. Never leave the house at all without a few extra sets of strings. But for those practicing this at home, I'd hate for somebody to start breaking a ton of strings because I didn't make that perfectly clear. So far I've been fortunate, but I might not be as fortunate if I used a lighter set of strings. All the additional noise from the attack of the note, that's gonna go away once you're in a band mix, as long as you're not using like heavy metal levels of gain, and who wants to play heavy metal anyhow when you can play Buddy Guy instead? The thing you want to avoid is noise on the first string. You don't want to excite the harmonic and have a really harsh overtone. So there's something you might experiment with. I'll be back again tomorrow. We are on the final stages of these daily uploads, but it's going on at least for another day. And look forward to seeing you then.